Live from the Xfinity Studios at WVON. We're your original social media. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective with Linal Harris on 1690, The Talk of Chicago.
Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibility. Find your power, passion, and purpose. You know it's time for you to walk with greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dream. The best right now. Inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live. Let's find your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals, let your greatness flow with inspirational perspective.
Good morning, Chicago. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach right here on WVON 1690 AM, The Talk of Chicago. Inspirational Perspective on your radio is all about murdering mediocrity and living the best life possible. So as I ask you every Sunday morning, are you living the best life possible? And this is the place to be to explore that possibility. Well, good Sunday morning. It's the 10th day of 2021. And man, this year is already beginning to define itself. For me, I'm curious, how is it defining itself for you? And is it defining itself aligned with your vision and the story that you are creating for your life? Or is it defining itself based on the current circumstance and situations all around you? That's a personal question for you to contemplate there. But today, I want to talk about examining the stories we tell ourselves. And why these stories and understanding, more than anything, distinguishing the story is so incredibly important. We live within our stories. And as human beings, we're social creatures, and many of the ways that we pass history on, we pass family tradition on, we pass ritual on, is through storytelling. And I've been thinking about a particular story, and I think it might be fitting given all that's going on in the world. And it's a story I learned about Abraham Lincoln years ago when I read his autobiography. And the reason I think it's fitting is because of the recent events of the week. And so I want to talk a little bit about that story. And I want to talk about how the understanding we have of ourselves and the understanding that we have of others and our ability to act within that, right? And that is ultimately the story that we're telling ourselves about us, the story we're telling ourselves about others, and how accurate that story may or may not be is an incredibly important point in all leadership. And I think right now, our nation, our country, a lot of us are thinking about leadership. And in the absence of what I would say is effective leadership, what can happen? And so I'll talk a little bit about that. Some of the other things that we'll talk about today, I also want to discuss not just the stories we tell ourselves, but how, noticing our unconscious beliefs. One of the things I've really been thinking about, and again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about last week in terms of reprogramming our minds for success. And one of the things that keeps coming to my mind is what are the levels of belief? Like if we can actually distinguish the levels, and let me give you an example of what I mean. Towards the end of last year, I had Dr. Terry Mason on the show, and we were talking about health and well-being. As a matter of fact, we were talking about the fundamentals of health and well-being. And what I recall most about that show was that I really wanted Dr. Mason to get into tactics and begin to tell us, okay, what are the tactical fundamentals of taking care of our health? And he kept refusing. And I have a great deal of respect for Dr. Mason, and I kept wondering throughout the show, well, why is he refusing to do this? And if he's refusing to do this, I trust his judgment, and he must have a really good reason for why he's not sharing tactical fundamentals with the listeners. And the thing that he kept talking about is, what is your belief around your health? What is your belief? And that we operate within our beliefs. So, for example, if I don't believe that I'm eating unhealthy, then what good is it for him to lay out tactically what you should eat? When he shares tactically what you should eat, you fundamentally don't believe you have to eat that to be healthy because you believe a different story. And, it's funny because as we progressed in the show, I began to realize what was happening. And even after that, I listened back to the show, and it's turned into one of my favorites in the fact that what he was pointing to in his wisdom and what he's seen as a doctor, what he's seen in patients, what he's seen in individuals throughout the years, individuals that he's mentored, spoken to, keynotes, etc., is that no matter how much information, no matter how much wisdom, no matter how much knowledge you pour on a person, if they are not aware fundamentally of their unconscious beliefs, it does not matter. And that's one of the reasons I want to have this conversation this morning. Because if we don't really know the underlying story, the underlying beliefs that we have, and how that is impacting our behavior today, how that is impacting who it is that we be and how we show up in the world, but more importantly, how it's impacting where it is that we're going or where we intend to go, then really in many ways, we're fooling ourselves. If I don't understand that story, if I'm not clear on that story, and if I'm not doing the work every day to bring that story to the surface so that it can be addressed in my life, then in many ways, I'm wasting my time. Because I will operate within the subconscious story that is running my life. And that's what I really want to talk about today when I say the topic is examining the stories we tell ourselves. So then you might ask, well, Linal, how did we get here? And if you have an understanding already of where we're going this morning, then, man, by all means, reach out to a friend, a loved one, someone you care about, and say, hey, I think that today's show is going to be something that can shift things. Now, let me preface it with this. As a coach, I'm an ontological coach, and the work that I do with my clients week in, week out, day in, day out, and throughout the days, ultimately is helping my clients get underneath the story that they are telling themselves in contrast to their goals. So, or not in contrast to the goals, but sometimes in alignment with the goal, in contrast to the goal. I mean, the list goes on. And what's really on my mind is the fact that it's the beginning of a new year. And you guys know, those of you who know me well, know that the beginning of a new year always marks an opportunity to create a brand new story. Not just to create a brand new story, but also to lay out lay out what it is that we intend to create, given, in many ways, the blank new page that's in front of us with the brand new year. Now, in thinking about goals, because that's really where my mind is right now, working with the members of Slayer Goals, one of the things we're going to be talking about today is creating your intended result. What is my intended result? What is my intended result for this upcoming week? What do I want to accomplish? What is my intended result for the month of January? Another way of looking at that is, what is my intended result for the quarter, but ultimately for the year? But I really want us to take a look at not just our intended result over the framework of a year, over the time span of a year, but the intended result of your life. Another way to ask this is, where are you going? And I just want you to be with that question for a moment, because these are the things we're going to talk about today. Where are you going? Where are you going? Like, what is truly the purpose of your life? And when we look at life as a spiritual journey, because that's what it is, then a couple of questions. What will you create? What will you do? Who will you serve? Is that a part of your story? And more importantly, will you fulfill the purpose of your presence here in this earth realm? But in order to do that, we have to dive down a bit. And when I say dive down a bit, we have to dive down into the stories that we tell ourselves. See, because I want to be clear about something. Even the questions I just posed, that is a part of my story. My story is that I'm on a spiritual journey. My story is that I'm here for a very specific purpose. And part of that journey is to refine who it is that I am spiritually, but ultimately also identify and get closer in alignment with that overall purpose to fulfill the goal, the ultimate goal, and the ultimate purpose of this spiritual journey. That's my story. Now, many of you all who are listening, you share a similar story. But to what extent, to what depth are you operating your life day in and day out? This is not just to you, but to me as well. Day in and day out in alignment with that story. And this is really what we'll examine today throughout the show. So, if you have any thoughts on that, questions on that, please give me a phone call, 773-591-1690. And I'm going to start with this story. I'm going to kick things off with this story. I didn't plan on telling it. But I'm feeling led right now to go ahead and jump into the story. And this story is it's a story that I've told before, giving keynotes. And it's a story about Abraham Lincoln. So I want us to go back a bit, because I think in the context of today's topic, examining the stories we tell ourselves, I think sometimes shifting the context is helpful. And I also believe that this aligns well with, in many ways, what we've experienced over the last week and what's going on in our country and our nation. And if anything, it will give us some level of perspective. So I want us to go back to 1863. 1863, 19th century, Abraham Lincoln. And if you recall, in 1863, the United States was in the midst of a civil war. And the Civil War at this point had reached a peak. And the peak is the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg itself. And I want you to put yourself in the position of Abraham Lincoln, if you can, because we're examining stories. We're examining stories. And I want you to begin to think about, maybe if you can, the story that Abraham Lincoln was telling himself. And let's give some context here. The nation is fractured. There's bloodshed on both sides. And he's looking, his story is that this is one country. He was fighting to preserve the Union. And many of us, we can say, well, the war is about economics. The war is about slavery. I mean, there are many stories, many stories about what the war was and was not about. But again, in the context of Abraham Lincoln and his story, that's what I want to examine here. Because sometimes when we can look at stories outside of ourselves, we can see our own stories better. And so in 1863 is the Battle of Gettysburg. And in this battle, you have generals on two sides. You have General Meade, who was the leader of the Potomac Army and was on the Union side of the battle. And you had General Robert E. Lee, who was a Confederate general that we all know well, and was leading the battle for the Confederate side of the, at that time, the United States, fractured United States. And so the Battle of Gettysburg is a bloody battle. As a matter of fact, the Civil War was, a bloody conflict. And if you think in the context of Abraham Lincoln, you are a commander-in-chief who is losing lives on both sides, right? Because his story is that this is one nation. And he's losing lives on both sides of this battle. Every battle that's fought, in his mind, his story in American life is lost. And so he's in deep duress and very stressed out about this war overall. And in the Battle of Gettysburg, General Meade becomes the victor. He wins this battle, and General Lee is on the retreat. And General Meade has a decision to make. And his decision ultimately is, will I pursue General Lee to end the war? Or will I be cautious, engage General Lee in skirmishes as they retreat to, in some way, reduce his numbers and to deplete their resources as best as possible? Well, General Meade chose the cautious route. And so he sent troops to engage them in skirmishes and to reduce General Lee's resources. But he decided, based on the bloodshed that had taken place already at Gettysburg, that he did not want to pursue with all his might, just in case for some reason General Lee was retreating and setting him up. Now, there's one particular piece that's important, that General Lee, as he's retreating, he has to slow down because he's trying to cross the Potomac River, and the river is swelling. And so General Meade at this point has an opportunity to overwhelm General Lee and end the war. But because he had chosen to take a cautious approach, he doesn't. Now I'm going somewhere with this. So President Lincoln is getting a full account from his cabinet and his executives of what has taken place at Gettysburg after this all happens. And when he finds out that General Meade did not pursue General Lee and end the war, he is physically vexed. This is what it says in his autobiography, that he is physically vexed. And that one of the things they talk about in the autobiography is that President Lincoln also had a really foul mouth. And so they began to describe some of the things that he said when he found out. This is no interpretation. The man was upset, okay? He was upset. And so what he does is he decides that he wants to write General Meade a letter. And this is an angry letter, to be clear, okay? And in this letter, he begins to break down for General Meade why he is disappointed. And more than anything, why he felt that he missed an incredible window to end the war, and why ending the war was incredibly important at that point. As a matter of fact, I have some of the verbiage here. And if you can understand 19th century talk, he says, General Meade, I am very, very grateful to you for the magnificent success you gave the cause of the country at Gettysburg. Notice how he started with acknowledgement. And I am sorry now to be the author of the slightest pain to you. So he starts with acknowledgement, but then he goes on to share what his real true thoughts are. Then he goes on to say, I was in such deep distress myself that I could not restrain some expression of it in this letter. And there's a whole lot in the letter about his displeasure with General Meade, and then he ends it by saying this. Again, my dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in General Lee's escape. Now, if you can't understand 19th century talk, let me put this in 21st century terms. What President Lincoln was saying to General Meade in a really simple way, if we were using Twitter, we would say, dude, really? Bro, what in the world, right? I mean, that's basically what he was saying. Like, why did you let this man go? Now, here's the kicker. He never sent the letter.
I found this on the web.
He never sent the letter. And historians have been asking themselves, well, why didn't he send the letter? And what most historians believe is that President Lincoln had a great deal of emotional intelligence. And in exercising his emotional intelligence, he got into not only his story and how he felt is articulated very clearly in the letter, but he also thought about General Meade's story and how he would interpret the letter. And as a result, he decided not to send it. But he decided not to send it because at the end of the day, what mattered most was his goal. Let me say this again. He didn't send the letter because at the end of the day, what mattered most was the goal. And what was the goal for President Lincoln? The goal was to win the war. So despite the fact that his belief was that General Meade had done something wrong, what he realized is that if he had sent this letter, General Meade's story would have been, I have failed. I failed the president, and as a result, it's only right that I tender my resignation. And President Lincoln knew this. Not only did he know this, but he also knew that General Meade was necessary to reach the goal of ending and winning the war. And so because of that, even though he may have been right, he examined the story that he was telling himself. He examined the story that General Meade would tell himself, and he never sent the letter. Okay, so that's outside the context of you and I. And really what I'm pointing to here is when you think about your goals, when you think about the opportunity to truly, like full commitment to the goal, how committed are you? Are you so committed that even when you're right, you'll be quiet? Even when you know that what the other person has done is faulty, what's going on the other side over there needs to be addressed. But when you look at the big picture of your life, when you look at the goal overall, I need to pause. I need to let things play out the way they're going to play out. Because I understand not only the story I'm telling myself that I'm right here, but I also understand that if this person believes they're wrong, that it can, in many ways, undermine the larger goal. It can undermine the larger goal. And now I want us to think about, especially for those of us who are married, our marriage goals. And what it is that we're looking to create in a relationship. Maybe you're a parent. Your parenting goals and what you're looking to create as a parent. What you're looking to build in your children. For leaders who are listening, your business goals and what you're looking to create in your business. And the big question becomes, not only are you examining the stories that you tell yourself, that's one question, but are you examining the impact of your leadership and what you say and the stories that others may tell themselves? And does it align with your goals? Does it align with your goals? See, when we think about the stories we tell ourselves, man, this is how we live our lives. Again, we live within the stories that we tell ourselves. And our lives are based on, and many times, the subconscious routines that we create. The subconscious routines we create. Let me give you an example. Yesterday, my son and I, we were hanging out, and he had just woke up from his nap. And so we were sitting on the couch, we were playing, and all of a sudden, he took on the role of me. He took on the role of being daddy. He's like, Daddy. Because we had just woke up and we were playing on the couch, he was like, it's morning time. It's time for you to go brush your teeth and use the bathroom, right? And so I'm laughing, and I'm like, okay. So I get up, I walk to the bathroom, and I begin to, in many ways, humor him because he's playing the role of daddy. And I noticed that my son is actually playing out our morning routine as a game. By the way, a routine that often he is like opposed to in the mornings, right? And he's like, use the bathroom, wash your hands, brush your teeth. And he's walking me through the routine. And I'm blown away by this, right? Because what I begin to realize is he understands more about this routine. It's become subconscious to the point where he can recall it as a child, as a 3-year-old. He's playing out this routine all the way down to us getting in the car. We go to his room. He's like, this is the car. Sit down. Buckle up your seatbelt. Okay. Right? But what I'm pointing to is this has become one of his stories, the morning routine. I was recently asking my Slay Your Goals members, we talked about routine on Monday. Like, what is your morning routine? And how does it fit into the story that you tell yourself? How does it even in many ways align with the stories that you tell yourself? And see, often the stories that we tell ourselves start with things that disempower us. Oh, that's hard. Like, and before we even get involved, the story we told ourselves is, well, that's hard. Or another way of thinking about this is, I can't do that. And what I'm really trying to point to here is the power of the subconscious mind, the power of the stories that lie beneath the surface, and how it plays out and what it is that we're trying to create. So let me go back to this whole notion of belief that I was talking about with Dr. Mason. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week in terms of doubt. If one of your stories that you've been playing throughout your life over the years is that I'm not smart enough, I'm not worthy, I can't do this, it's hard, I'm not talented, I'm not special. If those, and I can continue. Other ways that we tell stories is I won't or I will. If I get that opportunity, I will drop it. I will drop the ball. I mean, and these are the things that are floating beneath the surface in terms of the stories that we're telling ourselves that are in alignment or out of alignment with the goal, or part of the reason there is no goal. If we can't get underneath those stories, the opportunity for success is just not there. The opportunity to be successful, the opportunity to truly achieve and accomplish the goal is not there. And so this morning, my big question is, what are some of the underlying stories that are keeping you from being successful? Because, by the way, it's nobody else. The biggest enemy that you have is you. The biggest enemy that's attacking you is you. And so what are the stories? For some of us, the stories go another way. I don't make mistakes. I'm never wrong. Right? And we're seeing some of that play itself out right now with the current president. You don't believe that in any way you can be wrong. How is that story impacting you? Are you really fully aware of your humanity? Are you really fully aware of the fallacy of the stories that you tell yourself? Do you have people outside of you who can actually point to and identify the story? And secondly, would you even believe them? Would you even believe them? Now, let's bring it to what happened this week. Many of us turned on the television in dismay. Couldn't believe what we were watching. Captivated, angry. I had clients who told me they got incredibly emotional. And consider that any reaction that you have or had has everything to do with your story. And by the way, that's all it is. See, it's incredibly important we understand this, because the better that I understand that it's just my story, it actually begins to create a certain curiosity about the other side of the story. It's just my story. And by the way, if you found yourself incredibly emotional, consider that the reason you got emotional, the reason you got extremely upset, is because you're attached to your story. Now let me slow down a little bit, because I know some of y'all gonna get mad at me, but I'm really trying to help us see something here. When I'm attached to a story, and again, remember, these are stories. What are stories? They're just narratives. And because it's a narrative, that means that there are many other different narratives that have their own idiosyncrasies. But when I'm attached to one narrative, that means that I have told myself or created for myself that narrative as a truth, despite the fact I may not have all the facts. I've created this narrative as a truth, and I'm attached to the narrative in a way where it creates an emotional reaction. Now, are there some things that we can see that when we begin to line up the facts, we know are true? Yeah. I mean, let's be clear. One of the stories many of us told ourselves, if that were me and people that look like me, it would have gone down very differently. And we can look at history, very recent history, as indicators that that story may be true. Okay? Again, as much as we want to call it a hardcore truth, we will never know until it plays out, right? But I think we kind of know how it would play out. And I'm going somewhere with this. But when we're attached to a story, it negates our ability to be objective. And when we're attached to a story, typically becomes a blind spot. And if I have a blind spot in my life, that means that is an area, until somehow light is shed there, I will operate in with little to no perspective. And so another question I'm asking you all this morning is, where are the blind spots in your life? And more importantly, how are the stories you're telling yourself in those blind spots hurting overall the intention you have for your life and where it is that you intend to go? What stories are you telling yourself? Now, 2021, 10 days in. And the other thing that I've been hearing a lot is, when will things get back to normal? And I want to talk about this in the next hour. This fallacy of normality. Because that's another story we tell ourselves. And by the way, the reason why I really want to have this conversation, and you know, this is probably not the sexiest conversation in the world. When I say sexy, like, oh man, you know, Linal he's doing it today, man. Teach him, bro. This is more thoughtful and probably a much more powerful and important conversation for us to be in. And I'd love to know what you all's thoughts are at the top of the hour. So give me a phone call, 773-591-1690. But one of the stories that many of us, or the stories that many of us have been telling ourselves, is things are not normal. And I want to get underneath the story of normal, because here's what happens when we tell ourselves stories like this, guys. If I tell myself a story that life should be different than what life is, it creates a gap in my life, because I have an expectation that I should be living life one way and a reality that is much different from that expectation. So there's a huge gap in expectation. By the way, like for instance, I talk to my married folks. Whenever there's a gap in expectation, typically there's a problem in the marriage, right? Well, think of your life as a marriage and a spiritual journey, and you're married to this physical body. And whenever I begin to create gaps, right? Gaps in my story based on an expectation, that creates a tension that we call stress. And I believe many of us are completely stressed out, not because the circumstance and situation that we're in is really all that stressful. And I'm going to slow down and explain this. But because of the expectation we have of how things should be, that's where the stress is coming from. Now, let me be clear. Last week, I talked about the fact that most of us live and experience life in a lavish way. Now, when I say lavish, this is what I mean. I've had the opportunity to live and travel the world, different parts of the world, live in different parts of the world and travel the world. And I can recall once being in the ghettos of South Africa, right outside of Cape Town. And many of the people were living in shanties, tin shanties. And there were dirt on the floor, bed in the corner, no refrigerator. And that was the reality of their life. And when you talk to these people, often they seem to be happier than people here that I talk to. They seem to have an experience of joy and bliss that's very different from those of us who live in the United States. And I remember experiencing that, and in the experience of it, asking myself, man, what makes us so different? And I believe it really comes down to the expectation. And I want to be clear about what I mean in terms of expectation. When I say expectation, I mean what I feel I'm entitled to. And many of us today, we're living in a reality where we expect and we feel entitled to more whether we work for it or not, whether we truly deserve it or not. I should be given to. You should do for me. And because of that, in the story that is underneath that, we're living in many ways a life that is more difficult than it has to be. And what I mean by difficult is we're more stressed out, we're more disappointed, we're more unhappy, there's less joy because of a story I'm telling myself that things should be this way over here. That, by the way, could be completely unfounded. Like, why should it be that way? And a story that I'm telling myself that I don't have enough, or this is not the way things should be. And I'm operating outside the clear gratitude for what it is that I already have. And I'm looking over the things I should be grateful for because of the story. Man, I hope I'm making myself clear. I'll know in a moment. We got some phone calls. I'll answer those phone calls at the top of the hour. But this morning, what story are you telling yourself? I mean, truly. If you were to get down to maybe the top 3 stories that you're running on a regular basis, maybe you're running a story about your health. Part of that story could be, I'll get started tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow, and you never do. But you believe that story, and that's what has you procrastinating day in, day out. How are you going to shift that story? Maybe it's a story about your spouse. They don't appreciate me. They don't love me. They don't really see me. You know, and then ask yourself the same questions, but do I love them? Do I see them? Not in the way that I think I should, but in the way that they think I should. And is that what's happening? That there's just a cross in communication, a cross in stories. The story that you tell yourself about your work, your job, and what you're doing day to day. What's that story? If you're a leader, the story you're telling yourself as a leader, and not just the impact it has on you, but the impact that it has on the people that you lead. What's that story? And what impact is the story that you're telling having on the people that you lead? Are you concerned about that? What's your story in terms of your finances? What's your story in terms of 2021? What's your story in terms of 2020? Many of us are living lives, living out scenarios, living out emotional experiences that we don't have to live out if we just shift the story. Many of us are more stressed than we have to be. Many of us are more depressed than we have to be. Many of us aren't experiencing the true bliss and happiness that we could experience. Many of us are telling ourselves the story of a tragedy that happened decades ago, over and over again, reliving that story constantly, not letting the story go. And as a result, we can't powerfully move forward in our lives. We can't accomplish goals. We can't set goals because we are completely enrolled in a story that is eroding our ability to create powerfully. All right, when we come back, more about examining stories, but I really want to talk about the normal fallacy and why normal is something we got to let go. It's a story. We'll talk about that when we come back. I'll take some phone calls. Again, call me 773-591-1690. You've been listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. We'll be right back. Don't change that dial.
Mike Island.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the Black Perspective. This week was a turning point for the country. We all watched
give me 1
shock
second.
and
Let me
awe
turn
as
this down.
insurrection took over the U.S. capital, costing lives and jeopardizing our democracy. The events of last week.
All right. So what questions do you have? I knew before I came on that this wasn't going to be one of those sensational topics. But if you can stick with it, I promise you, it's gonna completely transform some things up here. And what questions do you have? If you asked a question earlier, please just go ahead and copy and paste it so I can get to it. But Aaron, wow, just changed my total perspective on life, relationship, business, and all goals. Never consciously saw the stories on both sides and their relationships to the overall goal or purpose working and living together. Good stuff. Very insightful. Good. All right. So it looks like you guys are getting this. Should we have goals and expectations? Clarence, there's a difference between a goal and an expectation. And let me be clear about this. I set a goal. Just because I set the goal doesn't mean I have an expectation, right? And when I talk about expectation, I mean an entitlement. An entitlement that just because I set the goal is going to happen. I also understand that it takes action. I also understand that resistance is going to show up. I also understand I'm going to have to fight for this thing. One of the things about expectations that most people have, they go uncommunicated, and most of the time we don't work out or work towards the expectation. And that's why I'm distinguishing the difference there. Like, a goal is, in many ways, you could say a future expectation, but the difference is that it's something that you're communicating, it's something that you're working towards, it's something that you're creating very purposeful action towards, it's a vision. And so as a result, it does not just stand in the land of expectation, it's much more than that. And so that would be the difference. It's a good question, though. Let's see. How to recognize when the need to be right is getting in the way and how to overcome it. So this takes practice, Bill. It takes a sensitivity first to knowing that maybe that's part of your cognitive distortion. And when I say cognitive distortion, what I mean by that is your way of thinking. And so to break down context or cognitive distortions, we all have cognitive distortions. And for some of us, the pervasive cognitive distortion could be the right-wrong cognitive distortion or context, where I find value in being right. And because I find value in being right, on the flip side, I feel devalued when I'm wrong. And so I fight to be right. If I have this way of thinking, then I have to be very, very sensitive to pushing for being right versus really getting underneath the story itself. And so how you recognize that is through practice. You have to slow down and really be thoughtful and notice when you just go running with something. Like, and you fight to be right. Like, kind of sit back and say, I was right about that, but was I really? And it takes introspection and reflection. I mean, you really have to slow down. You really have to slow down. And so that's how you recognize when you have a need to be right. And then the other thing is coaching. Like a good coach will distinguish it for you almost immediately. Within the first session, second session, they'll tell you, hey, looks like you have a right-wrong context. You're going to have to watch out for this. And because that's something that you've been living with for, 3, 4, 5 decades, 6 decades, it's going to take a lot of practice to first really become aware of it, and then second, begin to shift it. And that's how you overcome it. Yeah. Thanks for that, Leslie. So it's a sensational topic. It just doesn't have the fluff we're used to. Yeah, man. You're talking about stories. You just gotta go in. I don't know how else to do it. Which is one of the reasons I told the story about Abraham Lincoln, because like there's stories playing out and the impact of a story. Like think about if his story mattered more to him than the story that General Meade was telling himself. Well, not that I think the Civil War would have gone different, because at the Battle of Gettysburg was a turning point. But General Meade, when you look at the history, was pivotal to the overall victory, right? There were a few more battles he fought that he did win. that if he hadn't won, who knows what could have happened. And that's, again, as leaders, why we have to be practicing emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence really is the ability to not be blinded by my story, but to get into the story of the people around me. So as a husband and a father, not to be blinded by my story of how things should go, but to also be curious about Pam's story and the story she may be running and the impact I can have on her emotionally as a result of that story. Or the story that Legend's telling himself, even as a 3-year-old. All right, we're back.
Inspirational Perspective with Linal Harris on 1690, The Talk of Chicago.
If you wanna be about it, come on, let's talk about it. Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibility. Find your power, passion, and purpose. You know it's time for you to walk in greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dreams. Right now. Inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live the dream. Let's slay your goals, let your greatness flow with inspirational perspective.
All right, we're back. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris. Right here on WVON 1690 AM, The Talk of Chicago. The topic today, examining the stories we tell ourselves. Examining the stories we tell ourselves and better understanding the impact that those stories have on our reality. We got some phone calls here. I want to jump to those phone calls, but if you're just tuning in, we've been really looking at who we are as storytellers and how we operate within those stories, whether they are true or whether they are false. And what I want to do next is talk about the fallacy of normal. Because I'm beginning to, I'm going to go to the phone lines first, but I'm beginning to really see that as change happens, so here's the thing about change. As human beings, we do not like change. Let's be clear. We fight against change, whether the change is good or whether the change is bad. And often we have very little perspective in the moment of change as to whether that change is good or bad. But we do put stories to it. And so the change will hit and we will say, this is a bad change. Not really understanding how that shift or that change will play out into the future. And right now, I want you to think about maybe a situation in your life where, it felt bad. The story you told yourself was, this is bad. But then it began to play out. And maybe months later, a year later, you look back and you're like, oh, I'm so grateful that happened. And you had to change your own narrative about that story. And now when you think about the story and how that change impacted your life, you say, that was a good change. And it just tells you how little perspective we have as humans on how change impacts us and how that change will play out in the future. Which is why it's so important that we are just really present in the moment, examining where I am in the moment, examining the blessings that I have in this very moment, grateful for the opportunity to breathe, the opportunity of sound mind, the opportunity to love in this present moment. Let's go to line 2. Maurice, good morning. How are you?
God, one people, one bank. Good morning, Coach.
Good morning. Good morning.
I enjoyed the little thing you did about Little Legend and your morning rituals.
Yeah.
That's a classic example of how early childhood development works, my brother.
Yeah, man. Hey,
did nothing but little audio video recorders, man. Whatever we say around them, whatever we do around them, they pick it up
Play it back.
They act it out. It becomes their storyline.
That's right. That's right.
Every time. Every time. And so we have to be careful about the way we behave around our children because they're going to act it out every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely,
That's
man.
my comment, brother, and
I
I
appreciate it.
enjoy it. Go ahead, my brother. Keep up the good work, Linal.
All right, thank you, Maurice. Thank you so much. Yeah, man. And let me tell you, I think it was surreal for me yesterday, watching him play the role of dad and me play the role of son. My son's 3.5 years old, and he's like, brush your teeth now. I'm like, man, do I have that tone with him? But I think he was being emphatic because, he was really trying to play the role of dad. But even he was like, all right, now we're going to go to the store. You have to get in the car. Hurry up and get in your seat. Put on your seatbelt. You know how to put on your seatbelt. All the things that we say, you're right, Maurice, he replays, and it's becoming a part of his story. So for us as parents, one of the things we got to be thinking about is what story am I creating for my children? Good stuff. Line 3, Mike, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Linal.
Good morning.
I really appreciate you, my brother, and thank you for being who you are and sharing that with all of us.
Oh, you're welcome.
I really saw and experienced the life coach, all of this that you were saying this morning. Man, this is just so right on and so right on. And I understand that sometimes the people that giving out the information because of certain circumstances, like what you spoke of, like with Dr. Mason, that could only say things in a certain way or so much, as well as you.
Yeah.
But I want to say this relating to some of the things that you've said, which is solution. You're very much solution-oriented, and we should be solution-oriented. How do we want to live our lives?
Yeah, man.
And I come to understand this, sort of like putting it in a physical way, as to say, a mindset is like a train. And a train can only run on a track that is set on, which is the mindset.
Man.
And a train can take you to your destination, your lifestyle that you want to live. If you give attention to it and pay attention to it, you will end up with the lifestyle that you want to live.
That's right. I believe that.
All these stories that you talk about, the narrations of them, and who's the narrator of them that's before you. And on one hand, at this very time that we living in this particular day, there is a financial revolution going on that will affect our life whether we participate in it or not.
Amen to that.
But
I
if
believe
we
that.
don't even know that the financial revolution is going on, then therefore we probably won't even consider or know to participate or try to learn or study how we can participate or where we will even be in it.
True. I believe that too. So, Brother Mike, why don't you share with us your perspective on the financial revolution, or in many ways, your story about it?
Okay. I have come to learn and be aware of it that's out there in the blockchain industry. That area, many companies and governments going to have their own blockchain. There's great opportunity out there. It's been statistically said that 800,000, I mind you, 800,000 new millionaires will be made.
Yeah.
And I'm saying if thousands of them would be in our community, that sure will change the landscape of our community.
It completely changes the landscape of our community.
And if we one of them, and our neighbor happened to be one of them, that sure would have fell up too.
Yeah. But let me say this. Let me say this, and this is one of the reasons I think, the stories we tell ourselves, Brother Mike, and thank you so much for the comment. Yeah, one of the reasons the stories we tell ourselves is so important is because I believe often when it comes to matters of money, many of us have a story that money is complicated. And that story creates fear when it comes to financial opportunity. Or we have a story, and this is psychologically proven, that if I risk, I will lose. And so I don't risk because my story is I will lose. And so you have these opportunities, in cryptocurrency and blockchain and how that's changing. And even any of those who are watching, you have to know, Bitcoin itself has doubled within a matter of a month. And you have to ask yourself why and what's the story playing there. And if I'm not involved, why am I not involved? What's the story I'm telling myself there? It might be I can't afford it. I don't know anything about it. That's too complicated. It's a story. It's a story. And I believe our community, we've allowed these type of stories to dominate our thinking to the point where we do miss out on critical opportunity. And we do miss out on changing narratives around us because we're not examining our story. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today. So I appreciate that comment. All right, so here's the next story that I really want to tackle. And again, call me if you have a perspective on it. But I want to tackle this, and that is the story of normal. Now, stick with me here, because again, this is one of those things where folks might get upset, and I'm okay with that, especially if I can plant a seed that you'll think about and allow the seed to grow. If I can plant the seed, if I can get the seed in and it grows, something will shift. So I want to talk about the fallacy of normal. Now, to be clear, there's a academic, and I'm actually looking for it right now if I can pull it up. I won't have time to pull it up. And so you guys can just go out there and Google. You can Google mental fallacies or the top fallacies that humans participate in. But we participate as a group in certain fallacies and certain ways of thinking. One of the fallacies that we participate in is the fallacy of normal. And I want to talk about that because I'm realizing that this whole notion that things are not normal and things have not been normal is running in many ways, is a story that's running in the forefront of many of our minds. And because that's the dominant story, we can't create anything. We can barely think about things. We're stressed out, we're depressed because things aren't normal, Linal. And then right now you might be like, well, Linal, it's not normal. What are you talking about? Well, listen. The appeal of normality is a logical fallacy. Or another way of saying it is that the appeal of normality is logically fallacious. And here's why. But we're talking about stories. Normal is a story. And anytime I'm saying that something is or is not normal, that means I'm enrolled in the story of the past. And I'm enrolled or attached. Remember, I talked about attachment. I'm so attached to the story that the shift from that story, or the fact that the story is no longer there, creates an emotional reaction. Again, remember, anything that I'm attached to can create a physiological response or an emotional response. Let me be clear. Like, I'm attached to my wife, I'm attached to my family. So anything that happens that impacts the story of my wife and my family is going to create an emotional reaction over here. All right, I'm okay with being attached to people and attached to individuals like my wife, like my son, like my family. I'm not okay with being attached to moments in the past or ways of being in the past. It's like, you know, you met the person who's attached to the fact that they were the high school standout star 20 years ago. And they're still in that story. They're still attached to that story. And they have emotional reactions around all those things. Often we look at that person and go, oh man, that's too bad. They're still living out that story. But in many ways, where are we doing that? So I want you to think about this. What is normal? Like, what is normal? Here we are, January 10th, 2021, okay? And many of us have not accepted the full reality of the state that this country is in, the full reality of what is happening around us, because we're so married to normal. Oh, this is crazy. Why can't things just get back to normal? Hey, normal is gone. Whatever it is that you were talking about before, that is gone. And I'm going to tell you something, folks. Until we can begin to accept that, you cannot move forward powerfully. Who are you in this moment? Who are you, and who will you be in the moments to come? Are you going to be someone cowering in the corner waiting for normal, or are you going to step forward powerfully in the present moment? Now, let me give you some examples. In terms of like how normal is right and wrong. This is example number one. I am slightly obese. This is perfectly normal in America. It's perfectly normal. And see, what happens is we get so enrolled in normal that it's okay. It's okay for the majority of us to be sick all the time. That's normal. Like, you want to talk about normal? You want to talk about normal? Hey, let's talk about some things that we call normal. That's not normal. It's not normal to be obese. I said it. It's unhealthy. That is not the normal way or the normal state that the human body should be in. What's normal is movement. What's normal is exercise. See, we get enrolled in what's normal and what's not normal. And many of us see normal in a fallacious way. Example number two. Oh man, I done seen this brother go from entrepreneurial endeavor to entrepreneurial endeavor. Why don't he be normal and just get a job? Who said working a 9 to 5 was normal? Again, folks, we begin to create these stories about normality. Well, it was normal not to wear a mask, Linal. It was. But guess what? I challenge you to go in your local grocery store now and see how normal it is not to wear a mask. That normality has changed. And the problem is that we get so bent out of shape. You know, some people, it's an attack on my civil liberties, my personal liberties. Okay, whatever. Guess what? Whether it's an attack or not, it's just not normal anymore. And when am I going to accept that? See, here's the thing. Some of us are competing so hard with reality that we can't create within this reality. We're fighting for the past. Our focus is on the past. And because our focus is on the past, we can't look forward to the future. Because when we think about what normal is or what normal should be, we have a skewed perspective. Let me give you another example to really drive this home. This one to get you all. In America, it's normal for women to make less than men. Are you good with that normality? You want normal? See, we get enrolled in this normal stuff. And here's the thing. Just normal don't mean it's right. Normal don't mean it's the best thing. And normal doesn't mean that is going to progress us towards our future. So many of us are lamenting normal for what? What will you create in 2021 despite what you believe is normal? Who will you be in 2021 despite the story you tell yourself of what is normal and what isn't normal? Like, man, we get so caught up in this story of normal. Man, you know what normal is? Right here, right now. Normal is the ability to take a deep breath and blow it out. Thank God for that. That's normal. But man, we have a skewed reality on what normal is. And let me tell you something. This is the reason why purpose matters. Because purpose brings with it perspective. When I'm focused solely on my spiritual journey and God's purpose for my life, it gets easier to recognize change, to be with change, and move forward. Because I'm not enrolled and attached to the things around me. I'm not caught up in the things around me. That's not normal. And let me tell you something. Pandemics, my brothers and sisters, are normal. We say, well, this is not normal. Well, the last time I looked at history, the human race has been plagued by pandemic. Has gone through pandemic. Has lived through pandemic. Has thrived through pandemic. It's normal. So when we say, well, this isn't normal. Well, how about it's different? It's different. I mean, I remember, Dr. Dennis Kimbrough, he called it out real good. He was like, man, I've lived through 3. This is my 3rd pandemic. The first was polio. The second was tuberculosis. And now we have COVID-19. Folks, we gotta, man, you go back in time. You talk to somebody that lived through the Great Depression and begin talking about what normal is and what normal isn't. People standing in bread lines, no money, broke. That was the reality. And believe me, a lot of people saying, well, this isn't normal, but that's what was. That was the reality. You go back and talk to someone who had to fight in the Korean War, who actually lived through World War II. And waking up in the morning to hear that Hawaii had been bombed, soldiers had lost their lives, aircraft carriers and battleships had been sunk, and that the country was going to war, that did not feel normal in that moment. But we forged ahead. Go back to the Korean War. Go back to Vietnam. And the vets coming home, distressed. Many peoples whose sons, even today, are not the same or were no longer normal. And we begin to see, man, that the story we tell ourselves often, it keeps us completely detached and distracted from the current reality. And the current reality is the only place I can create. It's the only place I can create. And most of us, we're not willing to accept it. We're not willing to be with it. And then we wonder why I'm spinning my wheels. Why can't I move forward? Well, because you're not here. You're not in the right now. You're in 2019. You're still romanticizing about 2018. This is 2021. Who will you be right now? What will you create right now? How will you pursue your purpose right now? And here's the thing. It all comes down to the story. Because if you believe, I just can't be with this, I just can't deal with this, guess what? You won't. And then you'll be living in an alternate reality. And as the world changes, you'll wake up one day and try to figure out, why am I so disconnected? Well, it's because you unplugged back in 2020. It's because you unplugged in 2021. Some of us, we're already disappointed with 2021. Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. I saw memes already about 2021. Here we go, 6 days in, 10 days in. Here we go. And one of the reasons we get so disenfranchised is because we had expectations of normal. When really, what's being defined in this moment, the moment that we live in right now, is right in front of us. And we've been saying it. I said years ago, these United States of America is in trouble. Years ago, I said it. Why? Because you can see it playing out. But if I'm enrolled in a story of an invincibility, that things will always be the same, then that's how we get shocked and surprised. Things will never be the same. There's a quote that I love, that the only constant is change. There's another quote that says, the only thing that you know you can get out of a vending machine is change. Because often what you buy will get stuck. And I like that one too. Change, change, change. Change is a constant. But when I'm telling myself a story that I can't be with change, when I'm telling myself a story that I can't create and change, then I'll play that story out. What story are you telling yourself this morning? What story are you telling yourself this morning? And more importantly, where are you going? Where are you going? See, here's the thing. And this is why goals are so important. When my eye is focused on what I'm creating in the future, when my eye is focused on a vision of my own health and well-being, a vision that I have for my marriage, a vision I have for my son, a vision that I have for the purpose that I've been allowed to live, the impact I believe God would have me make. When I'm focused on that, I'm not so concerned with what's happening in the present moment. I'm looking ahead. I'm forging a new future. And as things take place, I'm shifting with the sand. I'm moving. You know, you ever watch a surfer surf? The reason they can stay on the board is because as the waves change, as the wave moves, they adjust. And many of us, you know, we're not surfing this thing. As soon as there's a movement, as soon as something happens, we fall off. And the wave just moves right past us. Because we lack the ability to adjust. We lack the ability to accept it. You watch a surfer, they have to accept what's happening in that moment. Oh, the surge is swell. Let me lean back on the board. Oh, looks like the wave is slowing down. Let me move forward on the board. And if you were surfing 2020 and 2021, would you still be standing? Or has that wave left you somewhere in July, somewhere in March of 2020? You're still living out March 2020. This isn't normal. What story are you telling yourself? Let's go to Lewis on line 1. Lewis, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Harris. My comment is about that definition about normal. Could a better word be acceptance? What will you accept? You know, what would you accept as being normal in your life? Like you were saying about a woman being paid less than a man, and that's supposed to be normal. That it depends on what she will accept, you know, because she has a choice either to accept it or don't accept it. And if she accept it, then that could be thought of as being her normal, you know. But she doesn't have to accept it and make that into her normal, you know. Everything depends on how you define yourself, and how you define yourself defines your values in life.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Lewis, I can appreciate that. Well, here's what I'm pointing to with it, and thanks for bringing this up, because I want to make sure that's incredibly clear. What I'm pointing to is that all of this is aligned with some story. He hung up, okay. But all of this is aligned with some story. And there are people who believe that a woman being paid less is normal. There are people who don't believe that. But what I'm pointing to is the story that we believe and our attachment to that story and what that creates for us. And also the fallacy of normal itself as to whether or not it's okay, whether or not it's true, whether or not it's right, and whether or not it's wrong. All of it is based on interpretation. And that's what we're doing. We are, as human beings, literally moving through life, interpreting how we will navigate one thing after the next. And how we interpret it is largely based on the story that we tell ourselves. If I tell myself that I'm superior as a man to women, then my interpretation of whether or not that is normal and right has a lot to do with the story. If I tell myself that I'm a woman and I'm superior to man, how I look at that normality is right or wrong in the story I tell myself is going to have a lot to do with that. And what I'm really pointing to is not whether it's right or wrong, but what's your story? Us getting underneath our own individual stories. That's what's important. Because we can debate all of these things. We can debate whether or not obesity is normal, whether or not you can live a long life that way. We can debate all those things. What I'm really looking at is what's your story in contrast to what it is you're really looking to create. What's your story in contrast to what you really are looking to create? And how is that story disrupting you? Because as human beings, we live within our stories. And that's why today's title is Examining the Stories We Tell Ourselves. And again, thank you guys for the phone calls, because it's helping drive the clarity I really want us to have around this. Now, one of the things that we do in coaching, first month when I'm working with a client, first thing we do is I help them get underneath their stories. Call these stories their cognitive distortions or their context. And these stories drive our ability to create. I'll give you examples. So one of the stories I had well before I got married was that, marriage didn't work. And so as a result, I didn't have any successful relationships that led to marriage, because the story was, for what? Marriage doesn't work. Well, after getting coaching and working with a coach, I began to create a new story. And that story was that I can create powerfully within my personal integrity. So if I intend to have a successful marriage, and I take all the actions I know how to take to have a successful marriage, and I speak and I, in many ways, declare successful marriage into my life, I can have a successful marriage. And so what happened is with coaching, when I got aware of the story and how the story was impacting my life outside of what I truly desire, because what I did desire was love. What I did desire was a successful marriage. What I did desire was a family. But my story was keeping me separated from that. And when I began to address the story, and when my story began to transform, all of a sudden, I had access to something different. I had access to something new. And that access allowed me to create what my wife and I have today in our marriage. It allowed me to create a family. But if I had not shifted the story, if I were, and by the way, I wasn't aware of the story, right? And how it was operating. And if I hadn't shifted that story, then the ability for me to create something that I truly deeply desired, one of my burning desires for family and love, I would not have been able to create that. That's another reason why it's so important that we examine our stories and really get underneath that whether you think it's true or not, it's a story. And you have the power as a creator to recraft your story. You have that power, nobody else. You can recraft your story. Let's go to Freddie.
How you doing?
Freddie,
Good morning, Lonnie. Great topic. That's why when you talked about it's important to live a purpose. When you know your purpose, you won't be emotional about certain things, and you won't do it the herd mentality. Again, what you said, this situation is going to be, this predict will be for a long time. People weren't prepared to adjust. See what I'm saying? You know, some people look for normal things to go on. It's like a job. A job just for a person, just so big, just want to be subtle, want to be average. You know, people never want to break out their true potential.
And by the way, Freddie, that's your story. You get where I'm going?
Yes.
Yeah, that's your story.
But we all was created to be great.
Right, and let me ask you this. Do you have a job or are you an entrepreneur?
I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and
I just left a job. I just retired from the job.
See,
you know what? I never like to be told what to do.
There you go. But see, but that's, you see how you create it within your story?
Yes.
And that's what I'm pointing to. But continue. I cut you off. Continue, please.
Yeah, no, go ahead. You're right. But then again, where did I learn that from? I had to learn from somewhere.
Yeah.
I grew up with that. I grew up with that behavior. I learned it from somewhere.
That's right.
And somebody else that learned it from someone else. So it's been brainwashed through history.
That's right.
You know, so I have to break that change. To see things different and be around people that I can be successful, that think different.
That's right.
You know, and then like Napoleon Hill, if you think you can, if you think you can't, you're right.
You're right. That's actually Henry Ford. But here's the thing. Well, here's what I love about what you just said. What you said is I have to put myself around different people. And see, here's the thing. The people around me impact my story. The people I'm listening to, they impact my story. I love that, Freddie. I love how you just shared that. But please continue.
All right, thank you. All right. No, I'm saying let somebody else get in.
No, that's good stuff, man. Thanks so much, brother.
All right, thank you, man.
Yeah, good stuff. Hey, man, all of this is why the 5 people closest to you have such an impact on your life. They have an impact on your life because they're helping you craft the narrative of the stories that you tell yourself. And we live within those stories. I can't say it enough. I just can't say it enough. All right, so then let's go here. So then what is all this for, Linal? Why do you want us to see the story? Why are we examining the story? Well, once we realize that we're operating within stories, then we can begin to shift the story. And why are we shifting the story? Well, because there's somewhere you should be going. Again, this is a spiritual journey. So then the question becomes, where are you going on this spiritual journey? Something just came to me. Let me say it. One of the reasons we're so caught up in what's happening in this physical world is because we're disconnected from our purpose. And Freddie just said it. See, purpose provides peace. And the reason purpose provides peace is because purpose is spiritual. And when I'm living aligned with my purpose, in pursuit of my purpose, that means I'm living in the best ways that I can, aligned with God's spiritual intentions for my life, right? In pursuit of God's spiritual intentions for my life that remain intact, right? Because that's internal, regardless of what happens in this world. Regardless of what happens. My purpose does not change. That is my anchor. It's the anchor. And many of us, we can't be with the change. We can't be with the shift. We can't be with all this uncertainty because as the waves of life move, we have no anchor. And because we don't have an anchor, We don't have anything to hold on to, and those waves move when then we move. And so we're just floating about aimlessly. And we liked where we were floating before, and we have no idea where we're going to float now, and that creates anxiety. That creates fear. And that's why these changes create so much fear and anxiety inside of you, because you're not anchored to purpose. And the more anchored to purpose you become, the more peace you have. And the more peace you have, the easier it is to accept change. The easier it is to be with the reality of what's happening around you. I don't have to, tune out. I don't have to completely numb myself, because I can be with it. Because no matter how it changes, my purpose does not change. Now, you guys stay tuned. I have a purpose course coming up February 6th. Marketing team is working on all the collateral. I already sold it at the masterclass. And so if you still have the link from the masterclass, you might want to use it if you have it. Because if you want to figure out, if you really want to know how to navigate 2021 and all the changes that will come, how to navigate what does not feel normal, it requires clarity of purpose, fully understanding why you are here on this spiritual journey. But man, let me tell you, man, folks, we're so caught up in this physical world and these physical changes that it disrupts our ability to really be with why we're here. Where are you going? And then for those of us who know our purpose, here's another question. How are you being distracted from getting there? How are you being distracted from getting to where you're supposed to go? Because just because you know your purpose doesn't mean you have peace. You got to be acting within it. See, because that's when you know you have the spiritual alignment, the spiritual connection. You can check in. Karen, good morning. How are you?
Good day, King. And I'm trying to get dressed, and you just put. I just have to say, you put it to the mic, and just like you said, in the physical world, we're taught that success is doing X, Y, Z. But in the spiritual world, it's knowing your purpose.
That's right.
And as you begin to embark upon your purpose, the people will come. The perfection will come. You know how people say, well, God, no, I'm not perfect. No, that's a lie. He created you perfect. It's just that as long as we walk in our purpose, we will continue to perfect what others and we've allowed to go wrong in the physical world. Mm-hmm. And as we begin to walk in our purpose, the people to keep you on perfect purpose will appear, just like the people appeared when you were in the fleshly world to do the wrong thing, to egg you on. So when you begin to walk in your purpose, there's a passion that comes behind it. But you also need the people behind you to keep you grounded, because walking in your purpose gets very tricky. Because you have many that don't know their purpose, and they will tend to think that your purpose is to destroy their purpose in the world. And your purpose is just to walk in the spiritual, not the worldly. But the people that are still in the worldly will get it confused, and your attacks will begin to come. In the Bible, it says, when you become friends with me, you will become enemies with the world. That's real. Because when you begin to walk your purpose in spirituality, the people that are still living in the world will begin to attack you. And you need those kings and queens behind you to keep you focused on your purpose. I love you. Have a great day.
Awesome. Amen to that. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for that. So where are we going? And where are you going? 2021. Brand new slate, brand new page, brand new chapter. It's funny. One of the people I follow on Instagram, they said, what's the name of this chapter at the beginning of the year? And I'll ask you all, what will be the name of this chapter? What will you create in 2021, despite everything that's happening? Despite everything that's going on. Right now, some people, they can't wait to the 20th. You can't wait to the 21st. Oh, if we can just have a new president, everything will return to normal. That's your story? If that's your story, you're going to be disappointed. I'm going to tell you, you might want to examine that story. You might want to get underneath that story. You might want to ask yourself why you've been telling yourself that story. What's your story? What stories are you telling yourself? How do you need to examine them? And are they going to help you get where you intend to go? And then for those of us, I want to spend the last 10 minutes or so talking to those of us who are purposeful. Those of us who are setting goals. Those of us who know our life's purpose. We're at a critical time. If you truly want the piece of purpose, if you truly want to create in a powerful way, then one of the questions we need to be asking ourselves is, how am I being distracted? How am I being distracted from fully living out my life's purpose? How am I being held up from tapping into and from creating the life that I know God would have me live? How am I being separated from the power and capacity I have to live out my purpose and spiritual journey in this earth realm? And see, here's the thing about distractions. They're the weeds. And you know what? Hey, maybe some of us got distracted this week. It was quite attractive. So maybe some of us got distracted. Okay, that's fine. Who will you be? Who will you be tomorrow? Who will you be today in the face of all that? In the purpose course, one of the things that I relate distractions to is weeds. And here's the reason why. Because when we think about purpose, purpose is, you consider purpose a seed. And, you put a seed in the ground, and the only way the seed is going to grow is if that seed gets watered. And so just because I have purpose doesn't mean that I'm on my way. I gotta add something to the purpose. And in the spiritual realm, we call that power. All right, power. The power, innate power that God has given me. The fact that I am connected to Him. Last week I gave you all the visual. I actually drew it out now, of the Venn diagram of what essence truly is, what spiritual substance and power truly is as a human being. And that is, if you think of a circle, two circles interconnected, the top circle is God, the bottom circle is you, and that connection in between, that's spirit. And that's the power, right? So when I know my purpose and I begin to use God's power through my spirit, my spiritual substance, and I pour water on that purpose, I pour water on that purpose to grow it, what happens is I begin to see results. Well, the results, well, if we go back to the physical realm, it's a shrub. A seed with water, you get a shrub. And you get this shrub, right? And what happens is that shrub comes up, but it comes up and it's pushing through resistance the entire time. And then even when it breaks to earth, then it has more resistance from the rain, from the elements, from the wind. And the only way that shrub will last is if it's getting routine doses of power. Well, another way of putting it is routine doses of spirit. And what happens is many of us, we're not getting the dose of spirit that we need because we're distracted. We're distracted by all the entertainment, all the news, all the things that are happening around us, and we're taking our eye off what really matters. And that's the journey we're on. That's the mission we've been given. And this morning, if you know your mission, I just want to encourage you to stay focused. Continue to craft your goals aligned with that mission. Notice veering off the path. The brother Mike called in and talked about trains, and sometimes you have that one-array train that has no direction. And many of us, we see ourselves as a train that knows where it's going. A train that, when it comes to the fork in the road, knows what direction to go. And if we don't know what direction to go, we know that it's time to stop the train and get connected until we have a direction. And so this morning, what's distracting you? 10 days into 2021, are your goals on paper? Are those goals aligned with your purpose on the planet? And if there's a story that's disconnecting you from the vision of the goal, what's the story? Is it the story that, man, it's too hard? Is it the story that, I can't do this, how will I do it? Is it a story that I'll fail if I do this? And more than anything, I want you to get present to the reality that that's all it is. It's a story. And if we live within the stories we tell ourselves, then how will you change the story this morning? What work do you need to do to shift the story? My wife posted on Instagram this week, I guess it was a Super Soul Sunday with Oprah and Jennifer Lopez. And we all know that Jennifer Lopez J-Lo is incredibly successful. And one of the things she was talking about is how she manufactures the story that she tells herself every day. And that she basically affirms herself, you're enough. You don't need anybody else to create what you're creating. And she went on to talk about the affirmations that she shares with herself, which is really, affirmation is nothing more than creating a new story and aligning yourself with a new story. And so for those of you who came to the masterclass last week, if you have your goals written down, are you repeating them as affirmations? Are you continuously and religiously speaking new life into yourself, crafting new stories into your conscious and subconscious mind? So that way, when you are up against the fire, when you are under resistance, you only have one way to go. Because that is the story that you've created. That is the story that you've told yourself. In many ways, you've completely extinguished the story of hard. You've completely extinguished the story of impossible. And you live in a new way of being where everything is possible if you're in alignment with your purpose and in alignment with the Creator. And I believe that this morning. That's my story. And I hope it's yours. But when I'm in alignment, when I'm operating in full connection with the Creator, everything is possible. I've seen it in my life over and over again. I've seen the evidence in my life. And those are the stories that I'm holding on to. And I'll continue to examine my stories, and the stories that are disempowering, the stories that pull me away from my purpose, the stories that in many ways inflict or create a gap between my ability to create and go where I know I intend to go. Those are the stories I'll let go and craft new stories in their place. What about you? This week, the practice for all of us, what story are you telling yourself? What are the stories you're telling yourself? And are those stories empowering what's next in your life? Or are they disconnecting you from the reality that you truly could be living? Are those stories creating levels of depression, anxiety, and fear that you really don't have to be with? Or will you craft a new story that allows a new level of peace, a new level of freedom, and ultimately the opportunity to live your life's purpose aligned with the Creator's desire for your life? Well, that's the show this morning. You've been listening to Inspirational Perspective. My name is Linal Harris, your host and life coach, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. Next up, Ernesto Borges with the Borges Report. Stay locked right here. God bless you, and stay inspired. It's a lifestyle choice.
Country.
President Trump did not address the act.
All right, you guys. That's the show. Let me tell you something. If you got something out of this, share it. Insist that they listen. Or tell them what minute point to go to. Because the better we can shift our stories, the more powerful we can live. All right, God bless you guys. And always thank you for the support.